The draft is right around the corner, and you know what that means. It's rumor season, and one of the latest ones has the Chargers picking a defensive lineman at 22.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Building through the trenches does not just mean on offense. It also means building things up on defense, and the Chargers definitely need to add a blue chip prospect on the defensive line. So we're going to talk about some of the rumors that are swirling around about that, and then talk about some trade expectations. Kind of what do these trades look like? What is the compensation? How do they make it work? What kind of charts do they look at? We're going to talk about all that, and then talk about some potential biggest surprises and some disappointments going into the next season.
Yeah, and I think you guys will be a little bit surprised about who my biggest potential disappointments are in 2025. But today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. David, as we were scouring the news wire to see if anything came out today about the Chargers, specifically with the draft and if anything was going on, I stumbled upon this ESPN Plus article that was done by, in this case, Jordan Reed and also our friend Chris Rim from ESPN, talking about the latest news revolving around the Chargers in the draft. And I thought this was interesting. Per Jordan Reed, the trenches have always been an emphasis for Chargers GM Joe Hortiz and Coach Jim Harbaugh, and sources expect this draft to be no different. Knowing Joe and his days with the Ravens, they were always strong up the middle, so I think they'll go best available defensive line. And this is important because one of the under-discussed things about the draft is how much the other teams in the NFL are trying to figure out what the teams around them are going to do.
Absolutely.
So just because it's an NFC, executive, none of that stuff matters. What you're perceived to be going to try to target at 22 is important. So if the Chargers, maybe this is a successful smokescreen by the Chargers to hope that people think they're going to take a defensive lineman at 22. But that is interesting to kind of see, okay, around the league, the buzz around the Chargers right now is in a deep class with some serious talent probably available to them at 22, that they're going to go in the trenches on the defensive side.
I mean, obviously it makes a lot of sense. Like the Chargers need to add premium talent and premium youth to that defensive line. They haven't had a difference maker in that aspect of their football team in a very, very long time. And it just so happens that there are several potential options that should be available around when the Chargers pick, whether that's Derrick Harmon or Kenneth Grant from Michigan or a Walter Nolan. Like, all three of those guys could realistically be there for the Chargers, and any of them could be made a Charger with that 22nd overall pick. So that definitely makes a ton of sense. And I know teams around the league know that and have been able to identify that. But here's the other thing. It's not the only need, and there are other big needs that the Chargers could address with that potential pick as well. Defensive line is important, but other positions need to be addressed as well.
And that's going to be the Chargers' hardest part of this draft, too, because it's like they're going to take someone, and they're going to take someone at a position of need more than likely with the 22nd overall pick. I'd almost guarantee it, with maybe a wild card cornerback like a Will Johnson falls to them. There are exceptions, obviously.
Sure.
At the same time, though, defensive line does make a lot of sense. It wouldn't be surprising at all to see them go with one of those guys. And I think that the other kind of added part to this is if other teams think you're going to take a Kenneth Grant because the Michigan connection, how does that handle maybe them trying to leapfrog you, right? So that's why it's important kind of what the rest of the league thinks about it. If somebody thinks you're going to take their guy, maybe they want to leapfrog you to go get him, which is why, most teams are trying to put out things that they don't want to do. But in the case of the Chargers, especially last year, they told us exactly what they were going to do, and then they did it. But I think the important thing here is kind of just, there's a very good likelihood that the Chargers are going to take an interior defensive lineman with one of their first couple picks. Because of the talent that's available, with pretty good options available to them probably in round 1 or even in round 2, that is likely. At the same time, I don't think it totally precludes them from taking a pass catcher or an offensive weapon in round 1.
Absolutely not, because that's one of the other position groups that they clearly need to add some real talent to. I mean, last year, we know what the biggest issues were. It was the offensive line could not handle those stunts or twists. It happened all throughout the season and got magnified to the umpteenth degree in the playoffs, where everything is magnified, especially your flaws and deficiencies. But it was also the pass catching options and those threats that you just didn't have. It was Ladd McConkey racking up almost 200 receiving yards, and then everybody else. So the Chargers could take a wide receiver, could be a Tet McMillan that possibly, falls down the board and is there at 22. That would have to be a really, really difficult conversation. Obviously, Colson Loveland, if he's there at 22, then I know, including myself, a lot of people would love that move, and it just fits like a glove. It's something that everybody can see the connection, and everybody can see the application as to why it would make the Chargers a better football team. So I absolutely don't think that this precludes them from taking a weapon, a pass catcher potentially at 22, but who knows? That's the beauty of it. See, with being at pick 5 like last year, there was only so many different scenarios that were going to play out. That is not the case now when the Chargers are picking at 22.
Yeah.
We have no idea. And even the best draft analysts in the world could come up with their mock drafts. The percentage that they get right is probably a lot lower than you would expect. There's so much volatility in the draft, you just don't know what's going to happen.
Well, and the later it gets in the first round, the stickier it gets, and the less likely you're going to nail it exactly. But I think as far as not giving up on pass catchers, I think it's important to just also know what Joe Ortiz's history is, and we've touched on it already. I mean, they drafted in Baltimore with Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator, outside of, Zay Flowers, who was right after him. But, with them, they ended up drafting 3 wide receivers in the first round over a 6-year span. They took 4 first-round wide receivers since 2015. So I don't think, pass catchers out of the realm of possibility by any means in round 1. It is interesting, though, one of the things I saw in my notes, the Ravens didn't take a running back in the first round, because I know that's been floated for the Chargers in round 1 since the year 2000 when they took Jamal Lewis. So not something they believed in Baltimore, taking running backs in round 1. But let's get one. It is Fan Mail Friday, though. We do want to get to as many of your guys' questions as possible, including this one from 80 is Woke, who says, over under how many of the Chargers' 10 picks do they actually take? David, are you going over or under 10? Or even right at it, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not going to go over. I think I'm going to go under. I'm feeling under. I think there's absolutely no way that they're actually going to go through this draft and take 10 different players. I have my number at 8. I think that they're going to put a package together, whether, some kind of trade, whether they're, obviously going to move up to try to do that. And I think that's what's going to happen. I just don't see any realistic scenario in which they actually take 10 players in this draft. I know you see 4 6-round picks, but I just feel like, to me, and I've always kind of felt this way, it's just ammunition to make a trade to go get a player that you absolutely can't live without.
Yeah, if I had to pick over or under 10, I would go under. I think there is still a chance, that 10 is what they end up taking, because even with a trade, you could end up having, like it was last year with Ladd McConkey, right?
Swap.
Where they traded a 4th-round pick and got back a 5th-round pick, and they ended up with Tarheeb Still and Ladd McConkey out of that trade, which obviously
Tarheeb Steele.
Looks awesome, obviously, in hindsight. But with Joe Ortiz's history, I would bank on them making a trade. I think also with those 4 6th-round picks, it seems like it would make a lot of sense to use one of those if there is a guy that you want to go up and get. You have that ammunition later on in the draft to move, one of those picks to go secure a guy that you really like. So especially with kind of the big needs that they have and the limited kind of top picks that they have, they might need to spend one of those to go get a guy if they feel like, hey, there's a run happening at this position, or after maybe this upcoming pick, maybe they don't think whatever that position is has anyone else that's really worth spending that pick on, and they need it. So there's a lot of different situations. If I was going over under 10, though, I would say, like you, that it's more likely it's going to be less than 10 picks that the Chargers take, if not just the 10 that they have. But we still have more to get into on this Fan Mail Friday, including a little bit of talking about how draft trades work and what realistic expectations are if the Chargers want to try to go up to get a top weapon, or if they want to just trade back to see what they could recoup. We're getting into all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys about Nissan Armada, because the Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan in the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada, because each week we're taking a look at a draft prospect and picking one guy that stands apart, someone that we believe that the Chargers really could take and also could fit the mold of what an Armada brings to the table. And this week's Armada and clear-cut Player of the Week is Tyler Warren, someone I'm talking about that fits all of the Armada categories: heavy-duty, rugged, physical after the catch, conquers the road with capability and confidence. I think that definitely describes Tyler Warren with the ball in his hand. I'd say another thing is versatile. The versatility of the Nissan Armada. You're talking about a guy who runs the ball, can play quarterback, can also play tight end and wide receiver as well. So when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what I think Tyler Warren can do here. It's clear that our Player of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. David, we have more of this Fan Mail Friday we wanted to get into, and thank you to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC on Twitter to give us your questions there, or called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. We've also been getting a lot on our Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and also on our Locked On Chargers YouTube channel as well. We appreciate the everydayers out there. But I think there's a lot of talk about the Chargers trading. We think they will make a trade, but I think it's important to realize what you could actually get back or what you would have to give up to get to certain spots of the draft. And I think that's what Athir's asking here.
David, no disrespect to Daniel. This is Athir. I am completely confused about this draft trade, how it works. Let's go back to the LT trade. I know the Falcons were desperate. They only move up 3 spots, and they got a haul. And the Chargers got the best running back in NFL history, in my opinion. How this works, because I am completely lost, my baby, and I pray to Jesus. I pray it will be answered from you tomorrow. Love you, my bro. Thank you.
I totally understand the question. The trade that Athir is referring to there is obviously the Chargers when they traded up to get out or back and picked LT in 2001. What's important to know here is picks in the top 5 are always going to cost a ton more, right? If you're moving in the top 5, you're going to have to spend a premium, even if you're only moving up a couple of picks, even if you're only moving up 1 pick. But the Chargers traded back from 1 to 5 and got back a 2001 third round pick, a 2002 second round pick, and Tim Dwight, as well as obviously the 5th overall pick that they used on LT. The Falcons, the reason they did that is because they got Michael Vick, who was a generational prospect, and they needed a quarterback. So no surprise there. But I do think that it's important to realize what the Chargers would get. I know a lot of Chargers fans say, oh, I would love to trade up to go get a Tyler Warren and get in the top 15, or I'd like to trade back and pick up another second round pick. It's not quite that simple. And that's why I wanted to get into kind of some of the actual examples of, teams trading from where around the Chargers are at 22 and what they would get back if they wanted to move up or if they wanted to move back. So let's talk about moving up first. And there's a recent example back in 2023, the Vikings moved up from 23 to 17 and gave up a 2024, or it was actually last season, a 2024 5th round pick, a 2025 3rd round pick, and a 2025 4th round pick. So that's 2 future, a day 2 and a day 3 pick, and also a this year's 5th round pick. That's a lot to move up 6 spots. So if the Chargers wanted to, make a significant jump to trying to get maybe a sliding Colson Loveland or a Tyler Warren, it might cost a little bit more than what you think it would, David. And I think it's important to know that, hey, even if you're looking, at some other ones, if you want to make that jump to go get him, it's probably going to cost you a 3rd round pick. And the Chargers only have 3 picks in the top 100.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and also it's business, right? So, I mean, there has to be value that's seen and observed on both sides to be able to make a deal, just first and foremost. And then when you're looking at NFL trades and trying to figure out as far as the draft type trades, what you want to kind of look at is the Jimmy Johnson model, where they kind of assess a value for
That's
every
one of the
single
ways,
pick.
yeah.
And starting with the first overall, it's a value of 3,000, and then it just decreases from there. So using that model, a couple of examples. So like a trade up example, if the Chargers wanted to move up from, where they are, to get past the Broncos to go to the Bucks at pick 19, the Chargers would trade their 22nd overall pick and this year's 3rd round pick to the Bucks in exchange for the 19th overall pick and then this year's 4th round pick. That, according to the model of the chart, the point totals would be the Chargers sending 940 and then the Bucks sending 930. So that's a pretty even trade when you look at that type of model. And then, obviously there's one where you could trade back, right? So I looked at, a trade back with the Detroit Lions at 28. So, as far as the pick total value for the Chargers, it's 780. So to be able to make this trade back work, you trade back to 28 with the Lions at a point total of 660. And then you would have to, you'd get their 28th overall pick and then a 3rd round pick at 102 and either their 4th round valued at 42 and equaling a total value of 794. So it's basically 794 to 780, which is pretty close, as far as the value is concerned. Or you swap that 4th round pick that you'd get with the 6th round pick, and then it's 764 to 780. So those are some pretty realistic trade situations using the Jimmy Johnson trade model.
Yeah, and it's not always going to work out that nicely, right?
No.
So yeah, basically what you're saying is, if the Chargers wanted to move up and beat the Broncos to a Colson level because they're afraid that they could take him, you'd have to give up your 3rd round pick and you'd probably get a Bucks 4th round pick back. But now, you have one less pick in the top 100. You could potentially net yourself a day 2 pick, but you'd probably have to slide down several spots. And I think that's the one big thing is be realistic about what you're going to get back in a trade back situation. Obviously, that's the Jimmy Johnson chart. Some teams use that. Might be a little dated, but that is kind of relative to what these things cost and have cost in the past. So you could just bump back a couple of spots. The 2022 Ravens with Joe Ortiz moved from 23 back to 25. They only moved back 2 spots and they got a 4th round pick back for it. So
that's nice.
If it was something like that, I think I can obviously get behind it. But I think this one is interesting. If you wanted to go and push yourself back even more, in 2022, the Patriots moved back from the Chiefs. They went from 21 to 29, and they got back a 2022 3rd round pick and a 2022 4th round pick. So You'd have to move back quite a bit, but you're getting, another top 100 pick with that 3rd round pick. So now at least you have another chance at getting someone who's more likely to be a starting level player for you. And you get back an additional 4th round pick too, which obviously, the higher the pick, the better in this scenario. And although Joe Ortiz hit gold with 2 5th round picks last year, you want as many higher picks as you possibly can. So I think another important one here would be the 2021 Jets. If you wanted to move in the top 15, if you're trying to get above the Colts, who everyone at this point is expecting to take a tight end, right?
Yeah, definitely.
In 2021, the Jets moved from 23 to 14, and it cost them a 2021 3rd round pick, or actually 2 2021 3rd round picks, but they also got back a 4th round pick. So you could potentially make that move, but know what you're going to have to give up, and it's potentially 2 day 2 picks. So I understand people wanting to move up for a Tyler Warren or a Colson Loveland. I understand people wanting to go backwards, but I think with the kind of guys who should be available there, it's hard to know if you should trade back at this point. But I do think it's important to kind of realize what you would actually net if you wanted to trade back and what it would actually cost if you want to go get one of those guys. So let's get to this one here from Big Daddy E really quick, who says, do you think the Chargers use some of their lower round picks to trade for a player from another team if they miss out on positions of need earlier in the draft? Maybe something like a Michael Mayer, for example. So what he's saying is, hey, if the Chargers don't get a tight end, on day 1 or 2, maybe then they ship a pick out to go get another tight end. Obviously, the one that makes the most sense is Dallas Goedert, just because he's the one that has all the smoke around him. I don't think it's impossible, but I'd say it's probably more likely to happen after the draft than actually during the 3-day draft event.
Yeah, for sure, because you have to see the totality of what you're able to accomplish throughout those 3 days, and you don't know the value that they're assessing on whatever position that they're trying to take and where they're going to be able to take it, and the traits that they're looking for from those type of players, right? Those are all things that you have to kind of keep in mind when you're talking about that. And also just like in interdivision trade, those just they just don't really happen. It's so, it's very, very few and far between.
As far as going for specifically Michael Mayer.
Right. For Michael Mayer, I think that one's maybe a little bit unrealistic. And I agree. I think after the draft, after you see what, after the dust settles and you see the players that you have and you see the opportunities that you still have, then I think that's when you make the move if you need to make it.
Totally agree. That being said, it's not impossible, right? Like if the Chargers think that really the only people that could help them at tight end this season are guys that can get on day 1 and 2, it's not impossible. And we've seen teams actually trade players during the draft, even if it's rare. You go back to 2022, the Rams on day 3 of the draft ended up trading for cornerback Troy Hill and sent a future 5th round pick, but it was pretty clear they maybe missed out on the guys they wanted at corner in that draft, and they went and addressed it during the draft. And also the Eagles in 2023 traded for DeAndre Swift on day 3 of the NFL draft. Maybe didn't get the running back they wanted. They ended up making a move to secure DeAndre Swift's services. So it does happen. I think it's more likely after the draft, but I don't think it's impossible. But we still have more to get into, including who we think could be the biggest pleasant surprises in 2025. And also, I think you'll be surprised by my disappointments potentially this year, and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Let's continue this Fan Mail Friday here, and we have a good one from John Clark coming up about maybe some surprises and disappointments coming up in 2025. But I do want to thank everyone, as always, for making us your first listen today. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, which is daily, keeping you up to date with all of the latest draft info with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. It's who I'm listening to every day in the ramp up to this big upcoming draft on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. And make sure you're back here on Monday with us as we get into our first 3-round mock draft of the season. Me and David, 2 different 3-round mock drafts, talking about the most likely picks the Chargers could use with their most important picks this upcoming draft. But let's get to this Fan Mail Friday question we have here, David, from John Clark, who says, in 2024, my biggest pleasant surprises were Deion Henley and Will Dissly, and my biggest disappointments were Joey Bosa and DJ Chark. Who are the roster players who will be the biggest pleasant surprises on offense and defense and the biggest disappointments on both sides of the ball this year? David, let's start with our pleasant surprises, and let's start with the offense. Who did you end up going with someone who could pleasantly surprise Chargers fans in 2025?
Yeah, I think it's one of the guys they picked up a little bit later on in free agency, and it is tight end Tyler Conklin. And it's because of opportunity. You look at, you go back and you look at the tight ends that the Chargers have had going back to 2020. There's a capable pass catching tight end, then they're getting a ton of opportunities with Justin Herbert. Hunter Henry, 93 targets, 60 receptions, over 600 receiving yards. Jared Cook in 21, 83 targets, 48 receptions, 564 yards. Gerald Everett in 2022, 58 receptions on 87 targets, 555 receiving yards. So the theme here is if you're a adequate pass catching tight end, you are going to get opportunities from Justin Herbert. And when you look at Tyler Conklin, he has been nothing if not consistent. 3 of 4 seasons over 550 yards and 4 straight seasons of 50-plus catches, and has very sure hands. As we've talked about a couple times, only 1 drop in the last 2 seasons, and that's over 150 targets. So very, very reliable, very sure-handed. I think he is a great candidate to overperform the expectations that a lot of people have for him.
Yeah, he was my pick for that too. I think that's the only pick that we have that's the same, but he's the first guy that jumped out in my mind, just because I don't think fans were super excited about the pick. And I think this is one that changes obviously dramatically based on what the Chargers do in the draft, but there's at least a possibility they don't get a tight end as soon as we would like them to, which means that Tyler Conklin could be a much bigger role than maybe most people are thinking he will have. Now, that being said, Justin Herbert also made Will Dissly one of the top receiving options in the league last year as a guy who was never really a big receiving option, and he's still in the mix, and he's going to still be on the field a ton. So they probably eat into each other's targets and yards a little bit, but I do think that Tyler Conklin could be a very pleasant surprise with just how consistent he's been. I mean, his average over the last 4 years, 58 catches, 553 yards, and 2.5 touchdowns, which would rank 14th in catches and 15th in yards if that was somebody last season. So for me, Hayden Hurst was a good argument for the biggest disappointment. Tyler Conklin could be the biggest pleasant surprise this year. Defensively, I ended up going with Deshaun Hand, the defensive lineman they picked up. And I think expectations is a big part of it. I don't think people are expecting a ton from Deshaun Hand. And in 2023, in a rotation, we actually saw him play at a really high level, and he's had some high-level production in his past. It's just really been injuries that have sidelined him and not let him kind of get to his full potential. If he stays healthy, I think we could be pleasantly surprised by Deshaun Hand's production in 2025, because last year I would argue that Poona Ford was the biggest pleasant surprise on this team.
No doubt.
I think one of these defensive linemen will make a jump. I'm picking Deshaun Hand. It could be Tier Tart. It could be Naquan Jones, but I think we could see one of those guys take a really big jump in 2025. And he's a guy last year that had 15 pressures. I could easily see that getting up to 20 or 25, and I could easily see him tripling what his sack output was last year. He had 1. I could see him getting 3 sacks in 2025. So I think he could be a pleasant surprise.
I agree, and with Mike Elston, being the Chargers defensive line coach, and the production that he was able to get out of that pretty much entire unit last year, I think bodes well for Deshaun Hand's ability to really kind of outperform, the expectations that he has, which right now is probably a rotational defensive lineman. And for me, my biggest surprise is going to be Cam Hart. Cam Hart had 1 sack last year, didn't have any interceptions, but had 5 pass breakups, had a forced fumble, and he had some big time hits. Like, he was absolutely an enforcer out there, kind of setting the tone, really getting on board with that physicality aspect that, Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter and, the Chargers want to, kind of shift their focus towards, and the play style that they want to kind of adhere to, which is that physicality. I think Cam Hart, the detractors were the fact that he had a couple of concussions and he had to miss some time. That's obviously something to monitor, but I think the more time now that he had so much experience getting on the field as a rookie and really, showing himself very, very well, I think this is another year in the system, another year in the same defense, getting more comfortable, understanding where he's supposed to be, where everyone else is supposed to be. I think with his physical gifts, he can absolutely break out and be a guy that a lot of people are saying, wow, this is amazing. We got Tarheeb Steele and we got Cam Hart in the 5th round, and both these guys are balling out.
Yeah, I agree with you from the standpoint of everyone knows, the ball hawking ability now of Tarheeb Steele, which could lead to an increase in targets for Cam Hart, who had pretty tight coverage last season when he was on the field. So I could definitely see him bumping that up a few numbers and actually kind of putting his name on the map a little bit. But we got to speed things up here for the biggest disappointments, because we got to go offense and defense here. David, who'd you go with your biggest potential disappointment on offense in 2025? And I know it's tough.
Yeah, it was tough, but my biggest disappointment was Kimani Vidal. For Kimani Vidal, everything started out great. Caught that beautiful touchdown on that wheel route, but after that, everything just kind of dissipated, and it wasn't for a lack of opportunity. He got plenty of carries to kind of be able to show what he was able to do, and he just wasn't able to do anything. And now, knowing that you have Najee Harris, and I expect them to grab another running back in the draft, there's a very good chance that Kimani Vidal's opportunities just go away completely.
It is a chance. I mean, he was a healthy scratch for, a good portion of games last season, too, in favor of Hassan Haskins, who's still on the roster. So they do add another running back in the draft. Definitely makes things much tougher for Kimani. My biggest disappointment offensively, potentially this year, is Mike Williams. And like I said, expectations has everything to do with it. And I think it depends on what your expectations are for Mike Williams, if you're going to be disappointed or not. And I think this really has to do with some people kind of just expecting him to pick up right where he left off with Justin Herbert, where he was on pace for another 1,000-yard season in 2023 before his injury. This one could have been on both sides of the conversation, right? He could also be a pleasant surprise too, but he played 18 games last year, even though he was barely used and was able to stay healthy. But there's still a chance that even with as excited as we could be, and Justin Herbert's excited about the move too, that he's maybe not the same player, or that he just has another injury because of the play style that he has and doesn't end up putting up the season we hope he can, and ends up being a little bit of a disappointment. Defensively, my disappointment was Junior Colson. And that's the hard thing with these. You don't know. It's easy to say now that DJ Chark is a disappointment, or Hayden Hurst is a disappointment, whatever, or Poona Ford is a pleasant surprise. It's hard to project it, but I think it has a lot to do with the expectations, like we said. And I think a lot of people are expecting Junior Colson to just step into this starting role next to Deion Henley and maybe even have a Deion Henley-esque type of leap in year 2, because that's what Deion Henley did. Not all linebackers are created equal, and I think the big thing here too is this is a dude who was slowed down by getting banged up in OTAs, banged up in training camp, and an IR stint during the season, where you never really got a chance, right? Like, that could happen, and we were also applauding him for having double clubbed hands, but like, injuries are going to make it tough, and I think with linebacker timelines, you just don't know when that breakout's going to be. So I hope that he can start. I think he's going to get every chance to and play well. But I think you have to slow down a little bit because we still have to see it, and he struggled in his snaps last year. Who did you go with?
Yeah, I went with Alohi Gilman for my biggest disappointment here. I think after he earned his contract, we all agreed that he earned that. His play has kind of steadily declined from that point in time. And last year, it was only 1 interception, allowed 13 yards per reception, and had a missed tackle rate over 16%.
Yeah,
so that is extremely high. And factoring in that you have Tony Jefferson, who's back in the fold, and Elijah Molden, who's also back in the fold on a new 3-year deal, that, you know, hey, if he's not able to play at a certain level, there are other guys that are in that room that can step on the field, and you could feel good about what they're going to be able to provide.
Yeah, and I like, again, you know, I hope Alohi Gilman has a bounce back season.
Same.
Definitely picked it up towards the end of the year last year when he came back from injury, but he had his best season in 2023, and he wasn't up to that level. So I wouldn't be surprised that with the Elijah Molden re-signing, with what we know Derwin James can bring to the table, if Alohi Gilman might be the weak spot of that unit and might turn up as a little bit of a disappointment, because we know he's going to be on the field if they want to use Derwin in the slot. If he's out there, there's times just where it looked like he had kind of lost a step. So I hope that's not the case. He's never been the fastest, most athletic guy. He's thrived on his instincts mostly.
Yeah, being in the right place at the right time. Yeah,
totally. But it wouldn't surprise me if there was a disappointing season for Alohi Gilman if we have to try to project it right now in April, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting to look at because there will be guys that'll make this list after the season, and we'll know it then. But this is looking ahead, and it's hard to project and look into that crystal ball. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you guys are back here on Mock Draft Monday, a 3-round mock draft from each of us, the whole show getting into who, you know, at least two potential ways the first 3 rounds could go for the Chargers and which positions we think are most important for them to address. And to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. We also post the show to all of our social media every day on Twitter at Locked On LAC, on our Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well. Thank you to everyone who hit us up for Fan Mail Friday today on all those places. And like a Thea called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. But excited and nervous to dig into, 6 more draft prospects this week and be back with our first 3-round mock draft of the offseason with you guys. I think there's a lot of guys to get excited about. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.